Touching first for Calvin in lane 4, the E relay. Heat 2. In lane 2, the Calvin C relay. In lane 3, the Hope B relay. In lane 4, the Calvin A relay. Lane 5, the Hope A relay. Lane 6, the Calvin B relay. And lane 7, the Calvin D relay. Touching first, the Calvin A relay in a time of 1:29.40. Second, the Calvin B relay in 1:34.88. This is event number 2, the women's 200-yard medley relay. There is one heat. In lane 1, we have the Calvin E relay. Lane 2, the Calvin C relay. Lane 3, the Hope B relay. Lane 4, the Calvin A relay. Lane 5, the Hope A relay. Lane 6, the Calvin B relay. Lane 7, the Hope C relay. And lane 8, the Calvin D relay. Touching first in the women's 200 medley relay is the Calvin A relay in a time of 1:43.57. Second is the Hope A relay in a time of 1:46.48. The next event will be combined. It is event 3 and 4, the men's and women's 1,000-yard freestyle. This is a Calvin heat for the 1000 freestyle. In lane 1, Kaylee Turner. Lane 2, Avery Russell. Lane 3, Ella McNeely. Lane 4, Aaliyah Caspit. Lane 6, John Reeder. Lane 7, Alex Bergsma. And lane 8, Andrew Stimpert. Coming into the 200 for the men, Alex Bergsma leading with 152.87. And leading for the women, Avery Russell with 210.24. Andrew Stimpert leading the men at the halfway point in a time of 4:54.33. Avery Russell for Calvin in lane 2, hitting the halfway point in 5:31.65. 200 yards to go for Andrew Stimpert. Avery Russell hitting the wall in a time of 8:54 with 200 yards to go. Andrew Stimpert coming into the wall, finishing up the men's 1,000 in a time of 10:01. Avery Russell from Calvin going into the last 50 here. Finishing up the women's 1,000, Avery Russell touching first in a time of 11:06. And for the men, Andrew Stimpert, followed by Alex Bergsma, followed by John Reeder. Ella McNeely and Kaylee Turner finishing their 1,000s, hitting the wall in 11:26 and 11:37. Aaliyah Caspit finishing up from the flags in a time of 11:55. The next event will be the men's 200-yard freestyle. There are 2 heats. Heat 1. The first heat here, all Calvin. Lane 2, Henry Phippen. Lane 3, Ryan Seidelman. Lane 4, Will Bales. Lane 5, Kellen Morford. Lane 6, Luka Zdradkov. Lane 7, Logan Bublik. Kellen Morford was out first for Calvin, but Luka Zdradkov putting up a strong back half. Heading into the last 50. Luka and Kellen coming into the wall. And Luka takes it home in a time of 1:43.80, followed by Kellen with a time of 1:44. Men's 200 freestyle, heat 2. Lane 1 for Hope, Aaron Thomas. Lane 2 for Calvin, Carter Detweiler. Lane 3 for Hope, Ethan Esparza. Lane 4 for Calvin, Ryan Hallberg. Lane 5 for Hope, Eric Kiesling. Lane 6 for Calvin, Jacob Ziegler. Lane 7 for Hope, John McHugh. And lane 8 for Calvin, Evan Haney. Out first for Calvin in lane 8, Evan Haney in a time of 23:98. Ryan Hallberg leading for Calvin, going out in the first 100, 49.77. Ryan Hallberg for Calvin still leading at the 150, followed closely by Jacob Ziegler. Ryan Hallberg and Jacob Ziegler coming into the wall. And touching first for Calvin, Ryan Hallberg in a time of 1:41.53, followed by Jacob Ziegler, 1:41.90. Carter Detweiler, 1:43. Evan Haney, 1:44. The next event is event 6, the women's 200-yard freestyle. There are 2 heats. This is heat 1. Lane 4 for Hope, Reese a step. Lane 5 for Hope, Ella Cabbage. Ella Cabbage for Hope heading into the last 50. Heat 2 of the women's 200 freestyle. Lane 1 for Hope, Ruth Conley. Lane 2 for Calvin, Maria Harris. Lane 3 for Hope, Gracie Putnam. Lane 4 for Calvin, Zoe Poe. Lane 5 for Hope, Katie Herman. Lane 6 for Calvin, Holly Vanderweel. Lane 7 for Hope, Natalie Patera. Maria Harris for Calvin taking it out. At the halfway point, Harris still leads, followed by Poe, Vanderweel, and Herman. And Putnam, sorry. Coming into the last 50, Poe for Calvin pulls away. Leading in 125, followed by Harris, Putnam, Herman, and Vanderweel. Down to the last 50 for the ladies. For the women's 2-3 coming into the wall. First, Zoe Poe, 155. Second, Maria Harris, 156. Third, Holly Vanderweel. Calvin takes the 1-2-3, followed by Katie Herman and Gracie Putnam from Hope. The next event will be event number 7, the men's 100-yard backstroke. There are 2 heats. Heat 1. Touching first for Calvin, Dhruv Patel. Second for Calvin, May Spooner, followed by Tim Campbell, Peter Crudelli, and Bernardo. Heat 2. Lane 1 for Hope, Jacob Mowers. Lane 2 for Calvin, Christian Heisinger. Lane 3 for Hope, Basilio Ledesma. Lane 4 for Calvin, Jackson Merkel. Lane 5 for Hope, Nick Serrani. Lane 6 for Calvin, Logan McKinney. Lane 7 for Hope, Luke Wheel. And lane 8 for Calvin, Dominic Rose, finishing up the men's 100-yard backstroke. Charging home into the wall for Calvin, Jackson Merkel touching first in 49.16, followed by Logan McKinney, 51.93. Nick Serrani from Hope taking third, and Dominic Rose in fourth. The next event is event number 8, the women's 100-yard backstroke. There are 2 heats. This is heat 1. In the first heat of the women's 100-yard backstroke in lane 4, we have Piper Sadowski, and lane 5, Tori Bijel. Touching first for Calvin, Tori Bijel, followed by Piper Sadowski. This is heat 2 of the women's 100 back. For heat 2 of the women's 100-yard backstroke, in lane 1, Bella Turner for Hope. Lane 2 for Calvin, Katie Fippen. Lane 3 for Hope, Anna Stoll. Lane 4 for Calvin, Maddie McNearney. Lane 5 for Hope, Claudia Boos. Lane 6 for Calvin, Megan Benjelink. And lane 7 for Hope, Laura Wozniak. Touching first for Hope, Claudia Buss. Second for Hope, Laura Wozniak. The next event is event number 9, the men's 100-yard breaststroke. There are 2 heats. This is heat 1. In this first heat, we have 2 Calvin swimmers. In lane 4, Alex Ketro. Lane 5, Luke Full. Alex Ketro for Calvin out strong in 26.87. Luke Full shortly behind him. Alex Ketro hitting the wall in 59.26, followed by Luke Full 101.83. Heat 2. In heat 2 of the men's 100 breast, lane 1 for Hope, Graham Eisman. Lane 2 for Calvin, Josh Crump. Lane 3 for Hope, Alex Pierce. Lane 4 for Calvin, Caleb Gemmen. Lane 5 for Hope, Joseph Engel. Lane 6 for Calvin, Andrew Talby. Lane 7 for Hope, Everett Cox. And lane 8 for Calvin, Antoine Duget. Coming into the 50, Caleb Gemmen leading, followed closely by Andrew Talby, Josh Crump, and Graham Eisman. Antoine Duget in lane 8, putting up a strong back half. Touching first for Calvin in lane 4, Caleb Gemmen. Second for Calvin in lane 2, Josh Crump. Third for Calvin in lane 6, Andrew Talby. Finishing 4th for Hope, Graham Eisman. The next event is event 10, the women's 100-yard breaststroke. There are 2 heats. This is heat 1. In this heat, it is all Calvin swimmers. Lane 3, Eden Mering. Lane 4, Anya Hopek. And lane 5, Isabella Tripp-Fellner. The results for the men's 100-yard backstroke are now scrolling on the screen. The women's 100-yard backstroke will start scrolling in about 5 minutes. Coming down the stretch for Calvin, Eden Mering and Anya Hopek. Hopek touches first. Heat 2. In Heat 2 of the women's 100-yard breaststroke for Hope in lane 1, Paige Potter. For Calvin in lane 2, Eloise Harrison. In lane 3 for Hope, Emma DeErico. Lane 4 for Calvin, Elizabeth Bajwa. Lane 5 for Hope, Allie O'Brien. Lane 6 for Calvin, Gracie Ganger. Lane 7 for Hope, Ashley Swingwood. And lane 8 for Calvin, Elise Radowski. Elise Bajwa leading, out in a 29.55. Followed by Gracie Ganger, also from Calvin, and Elise Radowski. Coming into the wall for Calvin, Elise Bajwa in a time of 102.89, followed by Gracie Ganger, 106.59. Calvin takes 1, 2, 3, 4. Hope takes 5, 6, 7, 8. The next event is event number 11, the men's 200-yard butterfly. In the water for the men's 200-yard butterfly. In lane 2 for Calvin, we have Drew Brunswick. Lane 3 for Calvin, Evan Nelson. Lane 4 for Calvin, Kyle Shackery. Lane 5 for Hope, Hunter Latham. Lane 6 for Calvin, Jake Skotanis. Coming into the halfway point, Kyle Shackery leading for Calvin. Followed by Hunter Latham, Jake Skotanis, and Evan Nelson. Down the stretch for the last 50, Shackery from Calvin still leads, followed by Latham for Hope. Evan Nelson and Skotanis close behind. Up from the last wall, Shackery crosses the flags and touches first in a time of 1:56.70, followed by Evan Nelson breaking 2 minutes and Hunter Latham in third. Next is event 12, the women's 200-yard butterfly. There is one heat for this event. In lane 3 for Calvin is Vivian Reiser. Lane 4 for Calvin, Elizabeth Deluski. Lane 5 for Hope, Meredith Ryder. Lane 6 for Calvin, Grace Shutter. Last 50 of the 200 fly for the women here. Touching first for Calvin, Grace Shutter in a time of 2:14. Second for Calvin, Vivian Reiser. And third for Calvin, Elizabeth Deluski. Up next is event 13, the men's 50-yard freestyle. In lane 1 for Hope, Lee Asink. Lane 2 for Calvin, Daniel Miller. Lane 3 for Hope, Kenny Pontius. Lane 4 for Calvin, Charles Platt. Lane 5 for Hope, Joseph Engel. Lane 6 for Calvin, David Gabriel. Lane 7 for Hope, Basilio Ledesma. Lane 8 for Calvin, Cardin Nguyen. Coming into the wall first for Calvin, Charles Platt, 20.5, followed by David Gabriel and Daniel Miller. Hope takes 4 and 6. Up next is event 14, the women's 50-yard freestyle. There are 2 heats. This is heat 1. There are 2 swimmers in this heat. They're both from Hope, Reese Estep and Kat Schaefer. Results for the men's 100-yard breaststroke are now scrolling. Touching first for Hope, Kat Schaefer. This is heat 2. In heat 2, lane 1 for Hope, Maddie Remenschneider. Lane 2 for Calvin, Emily Bartman. Lane 3 for Hope, Mackenzie Baldwin. Lane 4 for Calvin, Ella Andrews. Lane 5 for Hope, Greta Gidley. Lane 6 for Calvin, Sarah Algira. Lane 7 for Hope, Madeline McGee. Close finish into the wall. And touching first for Hope is Greta Gidley, followed by Ella Andrews. We will now have a 10-minute break. and resume with event number 17, the men's 100-yard freestyle. Competition will resume at 5:27. Swimmers, please clear the competition pool. Competition will resume with event number 17, the men's 100-yard freestyle. There are 3 heats of this event. This is heat 1. There are 4 Calvin swimmers in this first heat. Lane 3, Dhruv Patel. Lane 4, Timothy Campbell. Lane 5, Ryan Seidleman. Lane 6, Logan Bublik. Ryan Seidleman touching the wall first in lane 5, 48.97. Heat 2. In Heat 2, Lane 1 for Hope, Jacob Mowers. Lane 2 for Calvin, Dominic Rose. Lane 3 for Hope, Aaron Thomas. Lane 4 for Calvin, Kellen Morford. Lane 5 for Hope, Sam Albrecht. Lane 6 for Calvin, Lucas Radkov. Lane 7 for Hope, Luke Wheel. Lane 8 for Calvin, Luke Full. Out first for Calvin, Kellen Morford, 22.61, followed by Lucas Radkov and Dominic Rose. Luke Full in lane 8 coming into the 75. Kellen Morford still leading the way home, touching first for Calvin in a time of 47.0, followed by Lucas Radkov, 48.21, and Luke Full, 49.1. Heat 3. In lane 1 for Hope, John McHugh. Lane 2 for Calvin, Zach Logan. Lane 3 for Hope, Blake Hetherington. Lane 4, no one. Lane 5, Josh Brodowski. For Hope, lane 6 for Calvin, Carter Detweiler. Lane 7 for Hope, Noah Fletcher. Lane 8 for Calvin, Jacob Ziegler. Out first for Hope, Josh Brodowski. Touching first for Hope, Josh Brodowski, followed by Carter Detweiler. That concludes event number 17. Next is event number 18, the women's 100-yard freestyle. There are 2 heats. This is heat 1. In Heat 1, 5 Calvin swimmers, Emerson Irway in lane 2, Sarah Algiera in lane 3, Maria Harris in lane 4, Kristen Winkle in lane 5, and Emily Bartman in lane 6. In lane 4 for Calvin, taking it out, Maria Harris, 25.87, followed by Kristen Winkle. And touching first in lane 4 for Calvin, Maria Harris, 53.89. Lane 5 for Calvin, touching second, Kristen Winkle. Heat 2. In Heat 2, lane 1 for Hope, Natalie Patera. Lane 2 for Calvin, Holly Vanderweel. Lane 3 for Hope, Allie O'Brien. Lane 4 for Calvin, Megan Benjelink. Lane 5 for Hope, Gracie Putnam. Lane 6 for Calvin, Ella Andrews. Lane 7 for Hope, Meg Pinkerton. Lane 8 for Calvin, Elizabeth Bajwa. Taking it out for Calvin, Megan Benjelink and Holly Vanderweel, followed by Ella Andrews and Elizabeth Bajwa. Touching first for Calvin, Ella Andrews. Next event, event number 19, the men's 200-yard backstroke. There are 2 heats. This is Heat 1. Three Calvin swimmers in this first heat. Lane 3, Bernardo. Lane 4, Peter Crudelli. Lane 5, Carson McIntyre. Leading for Calvin at halfway, lane 5, Carson McIntyre. Touching first for Calvin in lane 5, Carson McIntyre, 158.99. And finishing up Heat 1 of the 200 back, Bernardo. Heat 2. In lane 2 for Calvin, Mace Boonder. Lane 3 for Hope, Eric Kiesling. Lane 4 for Calvin, Charles Platt. Lane 5 for Hope, Luke Wyrick. Lane 6 for Calvin, Ryan Hallberg. Lane 7 for Hope, Christian Hooksma. Lane 8 for Calvin, Ben Witchert. At the halfway point for Calvin, Charles Platt, 53.28, Ryan Hallberg, 55.47, and Luke Wyrick, 57, followed with Christian Hooksma. Charles Platt coming into the last 50, 121.36. Ryan Hallberg, 124.0. Charles Platt touching the wall, 149.78, followed by Ryan Hallberg, 152.76. And Christian Hooksma taking third, 157.70. The next event is event number 20, the women's 200-yard backstroke. For the only heat of the women's 200-yard backstroke, lane 3 for Hope, Meredith Ryder. Lane 4 for Calvin, Emma Merkel. Lane 5 for Hope, Emma DeErico. And lane 6 for Calvin, Katie Fippen. At the halfway point, leading for Calvin, Emma Merkel, followed by Emma DeErico in a 105 compared to 59. And Emma Merkel touching the wall on a time of 2:01.60. followed by Emma DeErico, 212.92. And rounding out the heat, Katie Phippen and Meredith Ryder. The next event is event number 21, the men's 200-yard breaststroke. There is one heat. In lane 2 for Calvin, Logan Yakubowski. Lane 3 for Hope, Joseph Engel. Lane 4 for Calvin, Josh Cromp. Lane 5 for Hope, Nick Serrani. Lane 6 for Calvin, Caleb Gemin. Out first for Calvin, Caleb Gemin, followed by Josh Cromp and Logan Yakubowski. Nick Serrani not far behind. Leading for Calvin at the halfway, Caleb Gemin, followed by Josh Cromp and Logan Yakubowski. Coming into the last 50, Caleb Gemin still leading, Josh Cromp not far behind, and Logan Yakubowski still making a strong push. Touching first for Calvin, Caleb Gemin, 206.99, Josh Cromp, 210.00, and Logan Yakubowski, 212. Rounding out the heat, Nick Serrani and Joseph Engel for Hope, touching 4 and 5. The next event is event number 22, the women's 200-yard breaststroke. There is one heat. In lane 2 for Calvin, Elise Radowski. Lane 3 for Hope, Kat Schaefer. Lane 4 for Calvin, Eloise Harrison. Lane 5 for Hope, Greta Gidley. Lane 6 for Calvin, Zoe Poe. Lane 7 for Calvin, Anya Hopek. Lane 8 for Calvin, Isabel Tripp Fellner. Touching first for Hope in lane 5, Greta Gidley, 221.68. Eloise Harrison and Elise Radowski touching second and third, 2:30. Anya Hopik, Zoe Poe, and Isabel Tripp-Fellner. Finishing out the heat. This concludes event number 22. Next event is event number 23, the men's 500-yard freestyle. There is one heat. In the men's 500-yard freestyle, lane 2 for Calvin, John Reeder. Lane 3 for Hope, Jack Suzba. Lane 4 for Calvin, Andrew Stimpert. Lane 5 for Hope, Nolan Smith. Lane 6 for Calvin, Alex Bergsma. Andrew Stimper for Calvin, 249.58 with 200 yards to go. Andrew Stimper coming in for the last 50, 4:18.84. 2 laps to go. Andrew Stimper for Calvin touching first, 4:48.17. Alex Bergsma following with 4:55.23. Nolan Smith for Hope touching third, followed by John Reeder from Calvin and John Souza. Next is event number 24, the women's 500-yard freestyle. There's one heat. In lane 1 for Hope, Meg Pinkerton. Lane 2 for Calvin, Ella McNeely. Lane 3 for Hope, Ella Cabbage. Lane 4 for Calvin, Kaylee Turner. Lane 5 for Hope, Ruth Conley. Lane 6 for Calvin, Avery Russell. Lane 7 for Hope, Brianna Elliott. Lane 8 for Calvin, Piper Sadowski. One 100 down for lane 7, Brianna Elliott from Hope. Now scrolling on the screens are the results for event number 22, the women's 200-yard breaststroke. .200 yards in, lane 7 for Hope, still leading Brianna Elliott, followed by Avery Russell from Calvin. Avery Russell and Brianna Elliott still leading out, 2:38.99 and 2:40.2. Avery Russell and Brianna Elliott close together, 3:12.87 and 3:12.18. And Avery Russell taking the lead, 3:45.43 to 3:45.77. Coming into the last 100 for lane 6 and 7. Avery Russell, 4:18.10, and Brianna Elliott, 4:18.8. Ella Cabbage from Hope. Avery Russell and Brianna Elliott getting the bell. Last 50. Avery Russell from Calvin taken to the wall, 5:22.53, followed by Brianna Elliott, 5:24.37. Ella Cabbage for Hope touching third. And Ruth Conley touching fifth after Meg Pinkerton in fourth. Kaylee Turner finishing out event number 24, the women's 500-yard freestyle. The next event is event number 25, the men's 100-yard butterfly. There are 2 heats. This is heat 1. In the water for heat 1. In lane 1 from Hope, Luke Wyrick. Lane 2 for Calvin, Drew Brunzik. Lane 3 for Hope, Ethan Esparza. Lane 4 for Calvin, Jake Skortanis. Lane 5 for Hope, Lee Assink. Lane 6 for Calvin, Will Bales. Lane 7 for Hope, Alex Pearson. Lane 8 for Calvin, Kyle Shackery. Shackery out fast, 23.7. Followed by Will Bales and Skortanis. Into the 75 wall, looking close from the outside in. Shackery, Bales, and Skortanis, with Shackery taking first in 52.06, with Bales behind 52.39, and Skortanis. Hope taking 4 and 5. Heat 2. In the water for heat 2, lane 1 from Hope, Kenny Pontius. Lane 2 from Calvin, Antoine Duche. Lane 3 for Hope, Tyler Hoped. Lane 4 for Calvin, Andrew Talby. Lane 5 for Hope, Everett Cox. Lane 6 for Calvin, David Gabriel. Lane 7 for Hope, Karsten Heisman. And lane 8 for Calvin, Daniel Miller. David Gabriel out fast, 22.94, followed by Daniel Miller and Andrew Talby. Antoine Duche in lane 2. Duche and Gabriel coming into the wall. And Gabriel touches first, 49.56, followed by Duche, 50.1. Andrew Talby, 50.8, and Daniel Miller, 51.56. 1, 2, 3, 4 for Calvin in that event. Next event is event number 26, the women's 100-yard butterfly. There are 2 heats. This is heat 1. In this heat, we have 3 swimmers. Lane 3 from Hope, Paige Potter. Lane 4 from Calvin, Gracie Ganger. Lane 5 from Hope, Anna Stoll. After this next heat of the women's 100-yard butterfly, there will be a 10-minute break. And touching first for Calvin, Gracie Ganger in lane 4, second for Hope in lane 5 and 3. Heat 2. In lane 1 for Hope, Madeline McGee. Lane 2 for Calvin, Vivian Reiser. Lane 3 for Hope, Katie Herman. Lane 4 for Calvin, Grace Shutter. Lane 5 for Hope, Mackenzie Baldwin. Lane 6 for Calvin, Aaliyah Caspit. And lane 7 for Hope, Avery Bills. Again, after this heat, there will be a 10-minute break, and then we will resume with the 200 IM and the 200 freestyle relay. Grace Shutter out first for Calvin, followed by Katie Herman. And touching first for Calvin, Grace Shutter, followed by Katie Herman, Mackenzie Baldwin, and Vivian Reiser for Calvin. This concludes event number 26, the women's 100-yard butterfly. We will resume competition with the men's 200-yard IM at 6:15. The time is 6:04. The competition pool is open for the next 10 minutes for warm-up and cool-down. 3-minute warning for swimmers in the competition pool. We will resume competition at 6:15 in 3 minutes. The time is 6:14. Swimmers, please exit the competition pool. 1-minute warning for resuming competition. Swimmers, please exit the competition pool. We will resume competition with Heat 1 of the men's 200-yard IM. In lane 4 for Calvin, Logan McKinney. Lane 5 for Calvin, Evan Nelson. Lane 6 for Calvin, Christian Huizinga. Leading at the halfway, Logan McKinney, followed by Evan Nelson and Christian Huizinga heading into the breaststroke leg. Evan Nelson making a comeback in the breaststroke leg, leading coming into the freestyle. Evan Nelson touching first. time of 1:58.72, followed by Logan McKinney, 2:01.89. And Christian Huizinga rounding out the heat. Heat 2. In lane 2 for Calvin, Logan Yakubowski. Lane 3 for Hope, Noah Fletcher. Lane 4 for Calvin, Jacob Ziegler. Lane 5 for Hope, Nolan Smith. Lane 6 for Calvin, Jackson Merkel. Lane 7 for Hope, Kellen Townsend. Lane 8 for Calvin, Evan Haney. Jackson Merkel leading after the butterfly. Jacob Ziegler and Logan Yakubowski close behind. Evan Haney in the outside lane 8. Exiting the backstroke, Jackson Merkel in the lead, 52.16, followed by Jacob Ziegler, 54.3. Evan Haney still in close, lane 8. Jacob Ziegler regaining the lead. And touching the wall first for Calvin in lane 4, Jacob Ziegler. Second for Calvin, Jackson Merkel. Third for Calvin, Evan Haney. Fourth for Calvin, Logan Yakubowski. All 4 Calvin swimmers breaking the 2-minute barrier. Touching 5th for Hope, Noah Fletcher. Nolan Smith in 6th, and Kellen Townsend. That concludes event number 29, the men's 200-yard IM. Next event is event number 30, the women's 200-yard IM. There are 2 heats. This is heat 1. In this heat, lane 3 from Hope, Ruth Conley. Lane 4 from Calvin, Elizabeth Deluski. Lane 5 from Hope, Natalie Patera. Lane 6 from Calvin, Tori Bijel. Lane 7 from Hope, Brianna Elliott. Leading at the halfway, Brianna Elliott from Hope, followed closely by Tori Bijel and Ruth Conley. Brianna Elliott from Hope heading into the freestyle leg, followed by Tori Bijel. Her touchpad didn't split her. Now it did. Touching first from Hope in lane 7, Brianna Elliott. Touching second from Hope, Natalie Patera, and third from Calvin, Tori Bijol. This concludes Heat 1. Heat 2 up next. In this heat, lane 1 from Hope, Allie O'Brien. Lane 2 from Calvin, Emerson Irway. Lane 3 from Hope, Ashley Swingwood. Lane 4 from Calvin, Zoe Poe. Lane 5 from Hope, Maddie Remenschneider. Lane 6 from Calvin, Maddie McNerney. Lane 7 from Hope, Claudia Bus. Lane 8 from Calvin, Eden Mering. Out first for Hope, Claudia Bus. Still leading in lane 7 from Hope. Lane 4 from Calvin, Zoe Poe, close behind. Zoe Poe taking the lead over the breaststroke leg. And finishing down to the wire, first, Zoe Poe, second, Claudia, and third, Maddie McNerney. That concludes event number 30. The next event up is event number 31, the men's 200-yard freestyle relay. There are 2 heats. This is Heat 1. And all Calvin heat to start off the 2 free relay. Lane 4, Calvin E. Lane 5, Calvin F. Lane 6, Calvin G. Calvin F. relay out strong. Last leg into the water for the Calvin F. relay. touching first in lane 4, the Calvin E relay. That concludes heat 1. Next up is heat 2. In lane 2, the Calvin C relay, lane 3, the Hope B relay, lane 4, the Calvin A relay, lane 5, the Hope A relay, lane 6, the Calvin B relay, and lane 7, the Calvin D relay. Calvin A and Hope A both out strong. Calvin A leading into the first wall. Heading into the third leg, Calvin A and Hope A neck and neck. Last legs into the water for Calvin A and Hope A. And touching first, the Calvin A relay. David Gabriel coming home strong, 20.66. Third, the Calvin B relay. That concludes event number 31. The last event of the meet, event number 32, the women's 200-yard freestyle relay. There is one heat. And in the water for the last race of the evening, lane 1, Calvin E relay, lane 2, Calvin C relay, lane 3, Hope B relay, lane 4, Calvin A relay, lane 5, Hope A relay, lane 6, Calvin B relay, lane 7, Calvin D relay, lane 8, Calvin F relay. Calvin taking an early lead into the first exchange. Calvin still leading, Calvin A, Calvin B into the third exchange. And finishing out, Calvin A, Calvin B, still 1-2. And touching first, the Calvin A relay. Second, the Calvin B relay. Third, the Hope A relay. And finishing out the competition in the competition pool tonight,